All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. This is the third, I think, entry
Third, yeah.
the third entry in WIRSPA's Icon series. We're really excited to have you here for that today. Your host is WIRSPA Community Envoy Matt Petrick, who you also might know from his website, cocktailwalk.com. And joining him is a very special guest, Lloyd Forbes, the former head of the Jamaica Rum and Spirits Trade Association. I'm going to let Matt give you the more extended introduction to Mr. Forbes in just a moment. Real quick, before we dive in, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co, and as always, just want to point out a few different ways that you can interact with Matt and Lloyd throughout the presentation today. So on your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from in the world. I know we have a lot of various rum makers and people from the industry in attendance today, so that's always great to see. If you have a question at any point for Matt or Lloyd, you'll see a little button at the bottom of the screen that says Ask a Question. So just hit that button, type your question in down there. We'll be keeping an eye out for those throughout the presentation. And last but not least, feel free to invite anyone you know to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes it easy to do that. But Matt, I think that's all from me for now. So I will turn things over to you.
Well, thank you, Will. It's a pleasure to be back, as always. This is, as you mentioned, WIRSPA's third in our Icon series. A little bit about that, actually. In 1971 was when WIRSPA was formed. And so here we are in 2021, 50 years later. Some amazing amount of work to sort of help elevate Caribbean rum has occurred as a result of WIRSPA over those past 50 years. And we wanted to take this opportunity to share more about WIRSPA and the work that's been done behind the scenes. And that includes talking with the people who've been there, in some cases from the very beginning, which is really amazing. And one of them is, of course, Lloyd Forbes here, which is my honor to be sitting here talking with him and having him share some of the amazing stories of Jamaican rum. I know enthusiasts really enjoy Jamaican rum and like to geek out over all the distilleries. And Lloyd's worked at several of them, and like I said, behind the scenes has actually helped change the Jamaican rum industry in substantial ways. So with that in mind, I want to say welcome, Lloyd. Thank you for joining us.
Thank God, happy to be here.
Yes. So let's jump right into the questions, because I know we have a lot. We've talked about them beforehand. We have a lot to get to. So first off, just tell us, how did you come into Jamaican rum industry? What was your starting spot?
I came in the rum industry by joining INZUD in 1964, 65. I was recruited actually to do industrial relations for both INZUD and Holland. But when I went to INZUD, the system at INZUD required that if you're going to work there, you'd have to understand the operations of everything in the sugar factory, everything in the distillery that you could learn over a 2-year period, and everything in the fields. INZUD then had an expatriate, Michael Nosworthy, that was already in industrial relations, so it allowed me free time to exploit the training programs that they had. And I started to like distillation. Number one, the distillery was a lot cooler to work in than the sugar factory. And it was a brand new distillery. It had good contracts for the product it was making. It was making all the alcohol that Jamaica required. So a large part of it went to Tia Marie. Another large part went to Gordon's Gin, which we supplied all the alcohol for gin for the Caribbean. And that was alcohol that both of that was at international standards. So that the situation at the distillery was rather secure. The year after I joined INZUD, the industry in Jamaica produced the largest quantity of sugar that we ever produced.
And when was that? Approximately, was that early 1960s?
1965, 66, I think.
Okay.
Just that. But didn't take long after that for the sugar industry to seriously decline from 500,000 tons of sugar. And that made the distillery more important because the sugar industry, it was written on the walls that the prices that we were getting for sugar in the 70s made it difficult for them to survive. Two things happened as a result of that, though. The political situation in Jamaica necessitated anybody that wanted to import anything into Jamaica would have to get a license to do it. And since Innswood could produce all the alcohol in Jamaica, or Jamaica required, it means that nobody could buy alcohol outside by importing alcohol. They had to come to Innswood, right. Which put them in a position that was admirable, but the distillery, even in that position, could not support the cost of operating the sugar factory. Apart from that, what you're experiencing in that type of situation is a shortage of capital to spend on anything. And the Innswood distillery operated on a boiler, which operated from oil, or back pressure from the factory. And back pressure from the factory was a lot cheaper to operate. So we tried to operate that.
I just want to jump in really quick. I say you're sort of a little unusual, and yet you're one of the people who've been in the industry for a very long time, who started out very early on, like distilling, learning everything, like all aspects of the operation. So I just wanted to mention that.
It was a requirement when you started. The sugar industry had suffered seriously from loss to the bauxite industry for personnel. So they're looking for what they consider qualified people that they could train. And although you took on a job, and I kept the industrial relations job portfolio, although I was in charge of the distillery all the time I was at Innswood.
Okay. So you were telling us about about the boilers and back pressures.
Well, the situation is that when you are short of cash to buy oil to operate a distillery, if you have any back pressure from the sugar factory, you require 14 psi to operate the distillery. You're producing steam from the boiler up to 150 psi and reducing. It caused problems in the distillery because of the temperature in the boiling column, which caused it to scale. And the other one is back pressure almost free. If you didn't use it at the distillery, blow it off to the roof.
So it was after a few years you became Innswood's manager. I think in the 60s or so.
No, I didn't ever become the manager of Innswood. I became the distillery manager. Okay. We had an expatriate manager at the distillery, Ben Cross. Mm-hmm. He was from the UK, and when he left, I had already had exposure at a number of other distilleries, including a local distillery. I should always remember Belive, who was the Seagroves manager for the Long Pond distillery, who was very instrumental in guiding me whichever way he could. He had a lot of time for me, so that I had that type of, and I actually visited Guyana. And visited other distilleries, so that when Ben Cross was to go back to the UK, I became appointed to the distillery manager.
Okay. Quick. I know this is off topic. Is this the same Ben Cross who later became helped start Maine Rum Company?
Yes. In fact, his whole name I think was Ben Cross Distributor. I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You said that name and it rang a bell because I've written about the Maine Rum Company and
actually I talk about it and he eventually helped us when we started looking at requirements for the following.
Okay, excellent. No, that's interesting things I did not know.
Yeah, we'll deal with that later on.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So after you were at Innswood for a little while. Where did you go after this? What was that?
I left Innsbruck and went to Rio Nephew,
Okay.
which was clear to me at Innsbruck, as I mentioned before, that the decline in the sugar industry would affect the distillery, because the distillery could not support the cost of operating the sugar factory. And with the political situation, one of the largest buyers of product from Innsbruck was Tia Maria. And after a statement that was made by the then Prime Minister of going to the mountaintop with our neighbors in Cuba, it was clear that Tia Maria would move over to Kahlua, and that Innsbruck would lose the best customer. So, in my own self-interest, I left and I went to and took a job with Rio Nephew.
Okay. So what was your initial role in Ray and Nephew, and what sort of things were you able to take with you that you learned?
The job that was offered me at Ray and Nephew was production manager, which would encompass the operating of the distillery, the blending hall, the bottling plant, and overseeing what happened at New Yarmouth. So on my first day of going to Appleton with one of the directors, I noticed that they were blowing off what I call the precious commodities through the roof from their back pressure, and I wondered why they were not using it at the distillery. So I then went and spoke with the distillery manager, George Morris, and he told me he was operating the distillery like we did at Innsbruck, backwards with the boilers from burning oil. And we discussed it at length. And it was decided right away we could use back pressure, and from that on, we switched over the back pressure from the sugar factory and saved a lot of money. So that was the first, that happened within the first week.
Okay, interesting. Okay. And then there were some other, I think you mentioned some other technical improvements you made, like in terms of like the distilling, like the heating of the wash and things like that.
But the situation is that Appleton as a distillery had a situation where they operated between end of December and ended in May. It's a very short time. They operated, I think, 5 pot stills and 2 continuous stills. And all the product that required cane juice had to be produced during that period of time. It was one of their most important marks. All their pot stills had internal coils, which every time it cleaned, it required a lot of downtime. So I introduced outside calandra, which it's all well and good speaking to an engineer to introduce that type of technology, but to speak to a blender who was born out of the idea, if you had a dent on the retort of a pot still and you change it, you would not produce the same product. Okay. So I was able to convince the engineers and the board that we could try an outside retort. So they allowed me to try one. I put it on the largest pot still, which produced maybe 50 or 60% of what they're producing, and converted it. But my fear was how to convince a blender that the product was the same. So what I did was make sure that the rums in the rum store was reduced substantially. And then I put all the product that came from that pot still in designated tanks and delivered it into Kingston, alternately with products from the other pots. And after doing that for a number of weeks, I invited them to the distillery. And I had before that been responsible for the entire lab. I had instituted a method of approving all products coming, which required GC and a note certifying that they accepted the product.
Oh, wow.
And they accepted it from, and we didn't identify which, we identified which vat it came out, but not which still it was produced. And when they came up and we were able to discuss it and they saw it, immediately they accepted it, and then we converted all the other pots. Okay. It meant, therefore, 2 things. we could then produce the rums that were required for blending and aging, which we never needed in the prescribed time, quite easily between December and May.
Interesting. So so as I understand it, the system that was in place before, the way they would distill and have to clean distills, it would take a lot of time. It was a lot of effort, to sort of downtime cleaning the distills, and your system basically caused those cleanings to be far less frequent. Is that a fair assessment?
One requires somebody going into a pot still and boiling it out first with caustic and then cleaning it, while the other one required a brush. You open the top of a calandra and took a brush and cleaned it. It was time-wise, you save hours, not minutes.
Right.
Yeah, and in fact, it could save more than a day.
Okay, interesting. So now let's switch over to the spirits pool. Tell us a little bit about the spirits pool. Like, some of us have heard the names, but we don't necessarily understand what it's about, the history, what were the issues that it was trying to solve. So give us a little background on that.
I was always a director of the spirits pool, even while I was at Intro. So I was familiar with all the directors. Because I was also with the industrial relations department, I was also familiar with all the managers of the in the industry, wider than just people that produce spirits. All the people that produced sugar, because we were part of the negotiation team with the unions. So that when the Cyprian Field was about to leave, he was retiring, that job came up, which would mean that I would not just be looking at Appleton and New York, but I would be looking at what is happening to the entire rum industry. Right. On the face of it, it seemed to me, an opportunity. But in fact, when you went to the spirits pool to work, the spirits pool, by law, required that all the distilleries give them an order for the rum they're going to produce. And all the gauging certificates passed through the spirits pool. So, and the quality of the product was overseen by the spirits pool. And we worked with the buyers from abroad. The spirits pool, they bought the rum from the spirits pool and paid the spirits pool, and the spirits pool paid the members. Spirits pool then was not computerized. About 7 people in it. So the first thing I did, we went to putting everything on a computer, and we were able to reduce the staff. But that only made it worse, because you're bored to death now. So you look for other things we could do. The industry then was suffering seriously from theft, rum theft. And some of that rum theft was affecting our buyers from abroad, because the tankers that were moving rum from the distilleries to the buyer, to the wharf, was subject to theft. All the rum sold by the distilleries were sold SOE, stripped on estate. So the buyer, it was put into the buyer's tank.
Right.
Those tanks we had problems with, because there were no necessary methods of cleaning tanks to make sure that product went into a clean tank. So we organized that through the spirits pool. We looked at the whole method of sealing the rum tankers. There were 22,000 liter tanks. The original seals were government sealed. You could take a cigarette lighter and open back the seal, because it was a lead seal, and you could seal it back, and the government stamp would still be on it. So we had to organize a better sealing arrangement. We had to organize the tanks that it was going into, that they would have the ability to seal it properly. So that was one of the first things.
Right.
Now, the big thing about the spirits pool is that we knew then exactly how much rum everybody produced. Molasses was bought from the distilleries, a lot of distillers produce their own molasses, and the rest of the molasses was bought from Molasses through their terminals, both at Lucy and at Port Isabel. Like myself, realized that over time, molasses, they would have no molasses to export. They were only interested in export molasses. And therefore, the terminals became the company. They were just a terminal, was on the market. And the spirits who bought it.
Okay. So I want to come back to that in just a moment, but for the benefit of people who aren't as familiar with the spirits pool, can you just tell us a little bit about the history from the 1930s, like why it was formed in the first place? Like this isn't something you see much in the way of other rum making countries.
Well, the spirits pool was born out of the idea that the buyers of Jamaican rums were put the distillers at a disadvantage. And they would wait till very late in the crop when the distilleries had problems with storage, etc., to offer buying the rum. So the price they paid for the rum was as little as possible. The distilleries, we have a number of distilleries, and the quality of the product from one crop year to another crop year fluctuated. So that made the situation, the product, not as valuable. But during that same period, there are a number of distilleries and a number of marks for rum, which were accepted worldwide as one of the best rums in the world. We had rums that came out of Hamlin, which were heavy rums, went into Germany, and went into something like rum Verschnitt, which we could produce all the rums they wanted, but they only wanted 2.5% of Jamaica rum to go in Verschnitt, and they call the product Jamaica Rum Verschnitt. So all of these things came together, and then the government got involved, and it created the Ester Control Act, which meant that we couldn't export rum over 1,600 esters, although we could produce 2,500 esters, and a number of other excise laws. And that was the birth of the spirits pool. The need to have a product that was acceptable. We need to have a situation where you wouldn't have an oversupply of any rum. That is why they had to order the rum from the spirits pool. The spirits pool wouldn't take an order unless you could sell it.
Right. Yeah. So, if I remember correctly, distilleries were prevented from making more rum than they had orders for.
That is correct.
Yeah. Yes. And then later, if I remember correctly, in the early 1960s, around when you were joining the industry, there was actually a decision made to actually effectively shut down certain factories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certain ones. I mean, for example, where the pipe stopped. There are a number of distilleries, I can't remember all of them by name, stopped producing because there was an oversupply. Right.
Yeah. And so it's fascinating, this organization that you've headed, which started in 1934, in a very, very different world, is still there today, and it's still sort of promoting,
The spirits pool itself as an entity didn't start until 1964, but the act was in from 1934, and there was a rum section of the industry. There's a sugar section and a rum section.
Right.
Because it happened.
Right. Yeah. Fair point. I always forget that little part. So let's go back to the molasses situation. You were talking that there was essentially supply issues with maintaining supply. How did you sort of jumped in and helped alleviate that? Tell us more about that.
Well, when we started first, we had enough molasses to meet the requirements of the sugar industry. There are a number of things that were wrong because molasses, seeing that they were coming out of business, both the terminals were, the maintenance was reduced. I'll be kind to them, say it was reduced. All the distilleries were responsible for setting the rates for moving molasses from either the terminal or sugar factory to the distillery. and they were using very small trucks. All the scales at the terminal could only handle 40 tons. So the first thing we did was we changed and made scales could have 100 tons. And we allowed molasses to come in large containers, 6,000 gallons. And we, the Caribbean molasses, negotiated with the tankers for the price for moving product. And then we had a system where the transportation cost was equalized, because going back to the spirit school was responsible for setting price. So we tried to get the costs more equally between the sugar factory distilleries and the one distillery to another. One distillery that had molasses we were paying the same price for their rum, but another one that had molasses transported. This made put the spirit school in a unique position. We knew how much product everybody was producing because we got the gauging certificate, we got the legal document, and we knew how much molasses they were using. So at the end of the year, we could work out how much product they were producing to a ton of molasses. At that point in time, the average conversion rate was about 150 liters of product to a ton of molasses. When I left the industry, having worked that out, it was over 265.
Wow, it's almost doubled.
More, just almost.
Yeah, more than doubled. Wow, that's amazing.
No, not 300.
Right. So as I remember correctly, at some point you actually purchased the terminal from the prior.
Yeah. We purchased both terminals. Well, what happened? One terminal was leased. The land was leased at Port Isabel, and we bought the other terminal and bought the land at Lucy. So we had a choice of a lot of the molasses came from Frome, which is why we wanted that terminal to maintain. And a lot of the molasses went from Frome, went to the distilleries on the north coast, which would have covered Long Pond, Hamden, and Bray and Naples distillery at Appleton. So the molasses from that terminal was very, very. It was unique. It could move, reduce double handling, and it reduced the mileage that we had to transfer molasses.
Excellent. Okay.
But so, you see, between having the figure of how much product they were going to produce and having the figure of how much molasses they use, we established a technical committee, which all the distilleries were members of. Okay. And the distilleries each month reported to the technical committee and detailed in relation to the product they made and how much molasses did they use. And unlike what happened later on in life, the information between the distilleries was shared. And with sharing that information, over time, they became more efficient. In fact, one of the distilleries that we still have operating now, it's quite unique, is WIRSPA, which has only a pot still. Mm-hmm. And they can compete with the continuous still efficiencies because that's pot still is completely automated.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. It's good to see that at least at the time the Jamaican distilleries were collaborating together and sort of rising together rather than fighting with each other over these things. So
I can tell you that the technical committee is no longer operating.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. We'll come back to technical committees in just a bit here. So now let's jump to WIRSPA. So tell us about the early days of WIRSPA. As I understand it, you were there in the beginning. Tell us about those early days.
The best thing about that WIRSPA first meeting is a hotel it was held at. It was held in 71, I think. We had at that meeting representatives from Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados, the Bahamas, Jamaica, think that I don't think we're on right.
And the Bahamas, that's an interesting one. Like
Yes,
we're used to thinking about, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, but Bahamas is an interesting one. Tell us.
But it is very important that we understand. It was the Bahamas that really wanted us to have that meeting. It was held on the SIP room. Who was then chairman of the Rum Committee, and their requirement for that meeting was one that everybody came to the meeting based on the invitation from SIP. I knew very little about it when I went to that meeting.
Okay.
But Bacardi that came to the meeting, Ophelia Pelez was their manager. Very, very unique person. And he brought his lawyer. And we all listened to what the Lome could offer us. With the ACP, each person looked at it and see what it would mean to them, and outlined what they thought should happen. For example, Guyana thought that the C means Caribbean, all the rum produced in the Caribbean should come from Caribbean molasses. Well, Bacardi bought part of the distillery in the Bahamas. He didn't even have a stick of cane. So you know how he felt about that.
Right. So real briefly, can you just in a sentence or two, when you mention Lome, could you just, for the people who aren't familiar with it, just tell us briefly why Lome was important?
Well, Lome offered us an opportunity to seek access, because we had access into Germany and we had access into the UK. Basically speaking, that we tried getting access into France, for example, because France produces some of the heavy rums, and we wanted to be able to, and we knew there was a market for heavy rums in France, but we couldn't sell a barrel of rum into France. So when we came to the Lome meeting, Bacardi obviously came to the Bahamas because he wanted a distillery that was already in the area where he could sell rum direct. And that was Bacardi's principle, since they were already pushed out of Cuba. So they started with a company producing rum in areas that they could sell it without any restriction. And they came prepared to tell the meeting of all the opportunities that lied if we could have a successful meeting with Europe. No, that meeting was scheduled for 4 years away or 3 years away, but the West Indian distilleries were not prepared for that opportunity. We didn't have a definition of rum. We didn't have a common definition for rum, and you couldn't go into that market without the product being properly defined.
Right.
Bacardi wanted rum to be produced at 100%. That's a joke, not 100%, but as high as possible, so you could blend it with the least transportation costs. Jamaica, which was producing alcohol for, as I said, Gordon's, and Jamaica was also producing alcohol for Silvertop gin and vodka and Gilbey's gin, had international standards that they had to meet for alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Tia Maria had a standard, and they didn't want alcohol in their product. They wanted that high strength rum. Right. So that, the negotiations eventually ended up where we had a subcommittee to look at each of the different problems that existed in the industry. And I think, being the young scribe in it, I was appointed to look at those. It necessitated my going to the UK. And here again, Ben Cross.
Okay.
He was in the UK. Right. And part of UK ring. So I knew him, having worked with him. We were able to look at the problem. And the advantage we had when they talked about producing all the raw material in the Caribbean. And we mentioned raw material for the UK for producing Scotch whiskey. So you must be joking. We buy a product from wherever we can get it, provided the price was right and the quality was right. Okay. So we had help based on my previous experience.
Right, right. So yeah, is it fair to say that that early first 3 or 4 years of WIRSPA was around getting the Caribbean rum producers to a state where they were able to negotiate with Europe and provide sort of uniform access for WIRSPA member countries into the European Union with like preferential tariff treatments, things like that?
That is simplifying it because with Jamaica having Seagrams, which owned the Long Pond distillery, Bacardi having the distillery in the Bahamas, Seagrams then was the largest seller of distilled spirits. There was jealousy between Seagrams and Bacardi. Bacardi was aiming to be the largest seller of rum. They were very careful because they lost their situation out of Cuba. So when we thought about going forward with anything in Europe, it was agreed that two things. First, no international company, that meant Seagrams or Bacardi, would represent the Caribbean rums. Right? The situation with the membership of WIRSPA was that the membership felt that Guyana, their political situation was very socialist, and therefore they were excluded from being the head of WIRSPA. And that didn't change until
fairly recently. Yeah, fairly recently.
Very recent. Okay. So we had to first work through all these other problems within WIRSPA. And then we had to decide what was the language we were going to use to convince Europe that we didn't want the same thing banana wanted. We didn't want what sugar wanted. What we wanted was access. And we're looking at an industrial product from agricultural origins that we're seeking to sell in Europe. And that was it. Now, the governments of the Caribbean, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, although we had meetings with them, we were not included in any discussions the government to government was having in relation to them. So everything that we had to do had to originate in the Caribbean. And Bacardi was very, very helpful because they had a lawyer, Peter Snyderite. I think he spoke about 4 or 5 languages, and he was well established in Brussels. So he was able to help us, right? So although that help, we got that help, Seagrams didn't object to any work that Bacardi did for us.
Okay.
So we could accept his help and accepted that they had the best interests of the Caribbean rums.
Okay. So ultimately over time, we had Lomé 1 and then Lomé 2, and so that there was for at least those 20 years or so, from 75 to 2000 or so, there was the Lomé conventions, which were providing WIRSPA member countries with sort of tariff, preferential tariff treatments in Europe.
Yeah, but let's go back to Lomé 1 first.
Yeah.
As I said, the industry did not have the support of the government, nor the recognition. But it was because of Lomé 1, and because although we could not be in the negotiations around the table, we were able to get our thoughts presented at that meeting. And when that meeting was concluded, we wanted 2 things, as we said. We wanted access, and we wanted a better treatment for rum version it. We wanted more Jamaica rum. So we achieved that. We got more rum in the first. Let's look at 2% and change it to 5, right? And after that meeting, we met with, again, worked through Bacardi. We met with all the diplomats and all the representatives from the colonies in the Caribbean, and WIRSPA became recognized.
Okay. Excellent. So at some point in not too soon or not too long after that, you became the WIRSPA chairman. So tell us about becoming WIRSPA chairman, and what were the issues on your plate at the time?
Well, obviously part of that was the LOME, and the fact that I headed up the group that was writing the definition for rum, meeting with the different countries. My situation with WIRSPA is that we had Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados, the Bahamas, and Jamaica. Fairly, at least fairly sound as distilleries, but we had other distilleries in the Caribbean that needed help. So I formed, again, like how I had it in Jamaica, a technical committee. And we exposed all those distilleries to technical situations which were not expensive because they didn't have a lot of money, so that they could improve their product. And more than anything else, that they could repeat the product year after year. And that the efficiency on the use of molasses, because some of them were paying fortune for molasses because they had to buy small quantities, which were shipped from Guyana, double-handled, but I think it came to Barbados, and then sent to their distilleries in small quantities. Some of the products, I felt that if somebody drank rum out of one of the small distilleries in Grenada, they might never drink rum again. While if we could improve Caribbean rum, the big people that export rum out throughout the world, they would benefit because the product would be at a standard that was acceptable. You have to remember the history of rum, going way back. We had a more preferred position than Scotch whiskey. And therefore, with that in mind, I felt that all the distillers in the Caribbean would go to a level, if they had the exposure, that our rums would be acceptable worldwide.
Right. And as I understand it, that even that during the Lomé period, there was not yet the rum sector program, but some of the technical work that you did with the committee helped set the stage for what the rum sector program could later do.
I wouldn't take that credit. A number of things happened with rum. There are countries pressing to get into Europe, and because we had a preferential situation, no rum going into Europe. We paid in the areas that we would ship to, pay tax, and their rums had to pay tax. So they were aiming for zero, right? That would affect us. And I think it was Evan who was chairman then. Not sure. We negotiated a situation to save us injury. In other words, back to protect the market that we had. In order to do that, we should get some funds for that. And that helped us substantially.
Right. Yeah. So because the Lomé agreement had, in the final Lomé agreement, you had sort of eliminated caps on there.
That is correct.
And you're like, this is great. And then very quickly, the U.S. and Europe came along with 0.0, sort of negates what you had finally won. And so then the European Union, we're sorry here, and we're going to help provide you with money to basically upgrade and modernize the rum industry. Is that
correct?
Yeah.
And that helped us in a number of ways, because that money was broken down into tranches. It was something for marketing, something for equipment and capital expenditures. And some of them are very attractive. Jamaica got a new warehouse and a new distillery. So that, there was a lot of things that were gained from that. And the marketing side, Jamaica did not get as much out of the marketing side of it as we possibly could have, because Jamaica felt that the Jamaica Standard Forum, for example, prevented anybody from putting anything in rum like sugar. And we felt that the marks that were approved by WIRSPA and accepted to be called our WIRSPA approved rum, Shalamar, some of them, Jamaica was of the opinion, not necessarily absolutely correct, but that they had rum in it, sugar in it. And therefore, although we supported the marketing program, we did not put on any of the Jamaica rums, as far as I know, up to today, at that mark.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So as I understand it, though, that this rum sector program and the sort of the modernization efforts and the attention to like the packaging details and consistent quality was in some part driven or preceded by the work you had done on the technical committee, the WIRSPA.
Yes, it helped. It helped. But you see, you're going back to Lome, or association with UK Rig, right? And as I said, I had the advantage of knowing somebody that was in Rig. We got assistance. And later on, when we started looking at CBI, and that was all of the UK side was handled through Bacardi. We had Seagrams in the United States, so that getting into discuss and getting information on labeling and bottling and requirements, Jamaica stood in a position where we had contacts on both sides.
Okay. So you were, if I remember correctly, you were WIRSPA chairman twice, if I remember correctly.
WIRSPA?
You were WIRSPA chairman twice, or
more than twice? More than twice.
Okay. So how had things changed from when you first assumed the chairman role to when your last time? Like, what had changed? Like, what was the progress made in that time?
Well, as I said, WIRSPA was born out of seeing what we could get out of Lome. Then we had a situation with CBI. These brought WIRSPA together very, very close. I mean, every member wanted what we could get out of Lome, what can we get out of CBI. What we wanted out of CBI again was access.
Right.
We said our language for CBI was Russian vodka is being allowed into the United States free of taxes. Poor little Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean is paying tax.
Right. Yeah. And just for those who aren't familiar with CBI, that was the just somewhat the United States version of Lome. Not exactly the same idea. It was the Caribbean.
Same idea.
Yeah.
Except at that time, some of the countries that they appointed on the CBI was not even in the Caribbean. But we won't bother go there.
Yeah, we won't go there. But yeah, it was during the Reagan era, 1982, 83, Caribbean Basin initiatives, and I have access to like those congressional transcripts, and very fascinating to read about the concerns of that era.
Yeah, but you had just to think about the CBI is that all the tax that was paid on rum in the United States, that's excise tax, was shared between Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Right.
And they were very worried about what would happen if Caribbean rums came into the United States. Well, what we did was, as I said, we met to discuss, and Seagrams helped us. We were able to convince them that they should look at it as a problem. They should look at it as an extension of the market. And we lobbied for them, U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, to get the tax on all rum sold in the United States.
Yeah.
So that made us happy. They were happy. We were happy because we got it.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
That credit, though, the last credit, I started out those negotiations, but the final agreement was signed under Patrick Mayer's chairmanship.
Okay. Yes. And we are hoping to get Patrick Mayers on and do an icon session with him as well soon, hopefully. So, So let's go. So past WIRSPA for you. When did you actually retire from the Jamaican rum industry? When was that?
Oh, 2.5 years ago.
2.5 ago. And what were some of the things you worked on? That sort of in the 21st century. What were some of the issues you worked on?
The first thing I had two different things for I was concerned about WIRSPA because what kept us together was our common need for action to gain things. And I thought that one of the problems the industry would be faced would be some of the same problems that cigarette faced. And you had lobbies going around in relation to the consumption of alcohol. In Jamaica, you had lobbies going around in relation to getting rid of waste. So the two things concerned me was the lobby with harmful use of alcohol. And I thought that WIRSPA should have a group that worked on that, because it would be better for us to work with the World Health Organization as an organization in relation to all the other persons of interest that wanted people to stop drinking rum. So if you could work with the health organization on the harmful use, protection of those people who shouldn't drink it, and the control in the Caribbean of rums that were used as part of festivals, as part of parties, which were generally sponsored by people that produced alcohol, whether it was beer or rum. And therefore, if you could establish in Jamaica, for example, we had a committee which was headed up by Red Stripe Bear, which would say that persons in the going to parties that were supported by the industry should have an armband. And unless you had an armband, you could not purchase rum there. And therefore, people under, I think, 18, we tried to protect them. And try to establish that Jamaica should work with the police, because at the end of any festival, every accident that happened, everybody told the personal reason why I had an accident because they were drunk, that we should work with the breathalyzer test. That has not happened yet. Because if that happened, we would eliminate some of the accidents that happened as a result of speeding, not necessarily drinking. And that we have a closer thing. That, I think, has to happen. And we should support the university, which has a detox situation for persons that abuse drugs. We should support those.
Right.
Well, those are two things I think that should happen.
Right. Yeah. No, and I will add, for those of us who don't sort of swim in this WIRSPA world, what you're talking about there is now being addressed as part of WIRSPA's responsible drinking initiative, with things like consistent messaging on labels, working with health organizations, all those things that you're talking about. WIRSPA, the WIRSPA Secretariat and the executive committee are all this is one of the primary things I see talked about when I hear about various WIRSPA meetings and so forth. So if I remember correctly as well, also your efforts in the 21st century, you played a pivotal role in getting Jamaica's rum GI. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Well, it came about, as I said at the start, we were using Jamaica rum in Versionet, and the product was called Versionet. As we said, it had 2.5 and we moved it to 5. I think it's at 10 now.
Right.
And that's unfair. We had rums of products, labels that were developed based in using Jamaica rum. And Jamaica rum required a slight increase in price. And those labels moved over from Jamaica rum to another rum. The label maintained. I think that was serious. So it was with that experience. I also, from Innsbruck, we had lemon heart rum that could be produced in Jamaica or could be produced in Guyana. Right? So it is with this type of experience that I felt that with the opportunity which came out of Europe to expose all of the distilleries to the value of a GI. We had a situation where everybody from every distillery could appoint somebody to go to Europe, look at a number of products that was produced in Europe under the GI, and establish and see the advantage of having a GI. We had a committee that was formed with all memberships of
And when was that? When was this sort of starting?
Oh, 19, I haven't got that date. It's about 8 years ago.
Okay. Like 2013 or so. Okay.
Yes, okay. And everybody participated. And we've wrote the code of practice and wrote the manual. Some of the members from day one. And remember now, Jamaica from Lome had established a definition for rum. And Jamaica had wrote the standard for rum, which became the Caribbean standard.
Right, the CARICOM rum standard.
That's the CARICOM standard. And
it got revised in 2008, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
Right.
And in all of that, every single member of the Spirits Pool was au fait with what was being discussed. And one of the things that were continued in it, and it's a problem today, is the amount of sugar you can put in rum. If it's Jamaica rum, for sure, there's no sugar in it.
Right. Yeah. If I understand it, the GI itself does not reference that additive. It's my understanding, but there's a different Jamaican regulation that is what prevents that.
You have the regulation on the law, which is the Jamaican standard, and it's also on the law.
Okay. So it was about a 4-year process or so, from say 2013 to 2016, 2017 or so.
Yeah, it was about 5 years.
Okay.
But between the first of the businesses also.
Okay. And you were sort of, would you say you were the sort of the one helping drive the process through to completion?
Yes, it was done on the Jaipur, the government, because the standard belongs to the government.
Right.
It was done on the auspices of the government.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned responsible drinking. Is there any other things, like sort of putting on your looking forward hat? Is there any other things that you think issues in the rum world, and or things you would like to think WIRSPA members should focus on to continue elevating Caribbean rum?
Well, the rum industry is going to face a serious problem with molasses. They're paying prices for molasses now that just 3 years ago, I wouldn't believe that they could pay that much.
Right.
So they're going to have to address that, and they can address that many ways. The standard for rum allows for the raw material. It hasn't got to be on molasses. It has to be from the sugar cane. Okay. So that needs to be addressed. That is going to be a problem for them. The situation is that in Jamaica, although we're saying that we should put it on the label and put things like responsible drinking, I don't think enough is being done by, as I said, with the breathalyzer test, with advertising the position of the industry. I don't think, although committees have been formed, I don't, as a consumer, I don't see anything that's different over the last 6 years.
Okay.
During the Christmas season and during other seasons, you might see something, but there's not an ongoing situation. And there are, if you go on the net or anywhere and look up things, there are groups that think that people should never have rum. As I said, the only way to do that is to work with the World Health Organization. There we might not agree on everything, but those areas that you agree on, we should exploit.
Excellent. All right. So that's what we have for questions now. I had questions. I'm looking over to there. I don't see anybody has asked any questions during our session so far. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up? Anything else, sort of prognostications for the future? Anything, any sort of final words?
I don't know. No, at the moment I can't think of anything other than what I think should be common for Jamaica and WIRSPA. And I'm hoping that the small Caribbean islands that still had problems as the last time I had with what they call bush alcohol, that those countries should work with the governments against it, because where you produce alcohol on those conditions, you can produce a product that will kill you, will get you blind. And that should, because that in itself is a problem that the industry should avoid, because it can cause serious damage to the industry.
Yeah, and I have efforts in there, and some of the producers have made efforts like that.
That's right, and I think that should be common.
Okay.
We had a situation in Jamaica for a short time where a still was stolen, and somebody tried to produce from. That was stamped out immediately. I don't think we have had another one since then.
So that's good. All right. Well, thank you, Lloyd. This has been very entertaining, very enlightening. Great to hear some of these stories from the past. I want to thank you for your time. And with that, just will mention really quickly, we have another Icon Series interview coming up in 2 weeks. It will be August 26th. We're going to be interviewing Margaret Montplaisir from St. Lucia Distillers. And I'm very much looking to that as well. I've met Margaret several times, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So, Will, can you take us out?
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. And Lloyd, just to echo what Matt said, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with everyone today. It's a great asset for the rum world to get to hear this sort of thing. And for everyone in attendance, thanks for coming. I just put a link up underneath the live stream. You'll see a little kind of green button down there that you can click to register for the next session that Matt just mentioned with Margaret from St. Lucia Distillers. I know that'll be great. So really looking forward to that one. But thank you everyone again for attending.
Where you said a little button that I could press?
Oh, you won't see it on your screen, Lloyd, but we'll make sure to email you the link so you can.
I'll get it.
Yeah, we'll get you.
I really would like to see you and Margaret. So.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. So yeah, you should come, and you can submit some questions for Matt to throw at Margaret throughout the session.
Please do.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and we will see you again next time.
Okay. Nice speaking.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.